Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's not so long ago that I was standing in front of a similar audience back in December at a CEDA event presenting the first ever 30-year infrastructure strategy. And as has already been mentioned, social housing was one of the top 3 transformative recommendations that we put out when we tabled this report in Parliament in December. So this is what I will be focusing on. Now, I'm French, and I'm highly mindful of the importance of a good lunch. So I promise that I won't be long before we can enjoy the hospitality of our sponsor today. Let's go for a little bit of context behind Infrastructure Victoria and that seminal 30-year infrastructure strategy. As most of you would know in this room, Infrastructure Victoria was created in October 2015 as an independent statutory authority. And I stress on that word independent. We're not reporting to a minister, we're not reporting to the Premier. We are fiscally independent in order to make sure that the transparency of the information that we provide for consultation and the robustness of the evidence that we provide to the government for good informed decision is absolutely spotless. We've been created to fulfill 3 functions. One is the development of the 30-year strategy. The second one is to provide advice in a transparent way to the government on infrastructure-related matters. Most of you would know that Infrastructure Victoria is currently working on providing advice to the government on the second container port in Melbourne, responding to the question, when are we likely to need a second container port and where should it be between Hastings and Bay West? For those of you who have an interest in this topic, I highly recommend visiting our website, where you will find not only the discussion paper which we released last week to open the consultation with the communities, but most importantly, the full body of evidence which we've released transparently around all of the analysis that we've accumulated in that work, reflecting again IV's DNA of being transparent and releasing things that have never been released publicly before. We feel that this is how we can have a good consultation and an informed debate. The third thing that we're doing is to conduct research on infrastructure-related matters, focusing on the methodologies and the tools that are being used in making good decisions in infrastructure matters. So it won't come as a surprise to you that we're looking at the benefit cost analysis, which is very relevant for social housing, because social housing carries significant non-market or intangible benefits, which are yet to be consistently priced in a benefit cost analysis. So we are working on this, looking, for instance, at a social return on investment, which is a technique commonly used in other jurisdictions, but not so much in Victoria, and see how we can actually apply this so that investments in social housing can have a more robust framework when it comes to social, environmental, and economic analysis. The 30-year infrastructure strategy, as was already mentioned, was tabled in Parliament in December. It was the end of sprinting a marathon around covering the first ever 30-year infrastructure strategy across 9 sectors. I'd like to draw your attention on one thing. The game change for that strategy is that it focuses first and foremost on how do we make the most of the existing assets? How do we optimize what we currently have before looking at expanding and actually building new assets? The second thing I'd like to draw your attention on is the fact that 70% of those recommendations have got a statewide impact. We were very mindful of that importance of the regional Victoria. Consultation, the depth and the breadth of the consultation we've done was no doubt a game changer in the reception that the strategy received when we released it. And I would like to take that opportunity to thank all of you for your participation through the various ways of consultation, because there is no doubt that we wouldn't have been able to almost do the impossible and table it in time without your help. So what's happening now? The government has got up to 12 months, meaning this year, to do 2 things. One, to respond to each and every single one of our 137 recommendations. And the second thing, and I would say most importantly, is to release their 5-year infrastructure plan, in which they will identify the capital projects that they've identified and will commit to, but also the policies and regulation reforms that they have identified as a key priority for the next 5 years. Infrastructure Victoria, by its construction, will then every year assess how the government delivers on the commitments, and make this assessment available publicly as part of our annual report. Of course, out of the 137 recommendations, we had to make sure that the focus was on the top 3 transformative ones. I have to say it was very pleasing to see Minister Wynne releasing last Saturday the Melbourne Plan Refresh, which underlines the importance of the very first top recommendation that we've made, and that is that in order to make the most of the existing assets, we do have to intensify the housing developments in established areas. We're not talking about high-rise everywhere. We're talking about medium-sized density that takes into consideration the environmental and heritage attributes of the neighborhood, capped to about 4 to 6 levels. But it is striking to see that over the last 30 years, the density in the middle ring of Melbourne, think 520 kilometers, has not moved at all, where you've got big concentration of the existing infrastructure. To note that this is also very relevant to the regional cities. The second important consideration that we've tabled is around the transport network pricing. Now, to say that this one got a lot of attention is an understatement. Interestingly, there was actually a lot of curiosity and interest around what it is that we mean by that. Well, that's very simple, ladies and gentlemen. We will not build our way out of congestion. We will not solve congestion until we've actually tackled the pricing signal and the demand side of using our roads. Just building more roads will absolutely not do it. It is important, and in our project, in our plan, we've actually identified some key projects, but this is not at the heart of it. We live in a world in Victoria where 1 kilometer of road in rural Victoria being driven on a Sunday afternoon has the same value as 1 kilometer of Hoddle Street being driven on a morning to go to the CBD. Precisely. It doesn't stack up. So to have a good review of the road user charges in order to get to something that reflects when and where you drive and reflect the fact that if the demand is higher on Hoddle Street at a specific time than it is in regional Victoria on Sunday afternoon, there is a price that actually should reflect it. And of course, very relevant to today's event, our third most transformative recommendations around social and affordable housing. To say that the positive feedback and strong support that we received when you discovered and the community discovered that we had elevated social housing as a key infrastructure consideration is an understatement. And that reflects the fact that we did consider social housing as an absolute priority if you look at what do we need in the next 30 years. And of course we should pay attention. The number of vulnerable Victorians facing housing stress in Victoria today is equivalent to the city of Ballarat. So we're not talking about something immaterial, far from it. Now at this point in time, I'd like to make a very important observation. The housing component in our strategy focuses on housing affordability for low-income, vulnerable Victorians, and not the broader but interrelated issue of housing affordability for home buyers. And I will ask you to keep that in mind for the rest of my presentation and that of the Minister. So, we've built our recommendations around 4 pillars. The first one is a very interesting one. It aims at how do we provide more support for low-income households to enter and remain in the private rental market. You will immediately have identified that this is not a hard infrastructure recommendation. This is a demand-side approach that aims at, through the increase of the state government housing rental assistance being currently provided, making sure that the future demand on social housing will actually be mitigated, provided that it's done in an appropriate and sensible way. The second pillar reflects exactly what I was telling you about. How do we make the most of the existing assets? Recognizing that when you look at the stock of public house, there are definitely some priorities. The Auditor General already highlighted the fact that 40% of the public house assets are 30 years and older. But there is another thing which struck us when we started looking at that, is that there is currently a disconnect between the assets we've got and those who actually need it. 70% of the public house dwellings have got 2 bedrooms or more, when 80% of those who actually need public housing are single parent, lone single, or couple without children. So it is that disconnect that forms the basis of one of our first recommendations, which is to invest in and improve the public housing asset management, whilst taking into consideration the fact that we should look at transferring the ownership and the management of those assets to the community housing sector. The second recommendation around this is to ensure that we've got, on the third one, the third pillar is also an interesting one because it actually reflects the planning reforms together with how do we provide better access for the private sector into this important market. So that's why an important recommendation is around how do we modify the planning system in order to enable fast-track approvals in affordable housing, whilst, of course, taking into consideration the views of the communities in the decision-making process. We're also recommending to introduce inclusionary zoning on government land primarily, but also where the government undertakes significant investment, which creates uplift values on private lands. We also recommend to introduce voluntary incentive-based statutory planning mechanisms in order to increase the affordable private rental dwellings. And that brings me to the fourth one. Now, I know I said, and I stick to what I said, that we should look first and foremost on how we make the most of the existing assets. But ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to social and affordable housing, there is no escape. We will need more assets. We will need more dwellings, starting with better access to crisis accommodation, focusing on the highly vulnerable Victorians who are facing homelessness or are escaping family violence. It is also of absolute essence that we look at how to support investment by the private sector for the provision of more private dwellings in affordable housing. And we will not escape one of the key recommendations that we table, which is that the state has got to provide more social housing dwellings than we actually need. We were very mindful not to put black on white a number because there are clearly some complex issues that are there, but we're talking about tens of thousands of dwellings that are needed in the next 10 years in order to be an appropriate response to the current and future demand that you, as experts in this field, know too well. Overarching all this, we heard loud and clear in our consultation that the state needing to provide a comprehensive statewide housing plan that will provide visibility and a relative number of certainty to the market operators and provide that concerted approach that we all need when it comes to delivering tangible outcomes. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm as eager as you are to hear what the Minister will reveal today, but I think it's fair to say that given the number of announcements that have taken place over the last couple of months, that there is a clear sense of momentum here in Victoria to tackle such an important issue. Thank you for your attention, and dare I say, but not in French, enjoy your lunch.